Hi, I'm Dr. Navarro, certified wellbeing expert working with families in education and companies supporting wellbeing. And as you know, every week I interview different experts who make a difference in people's lives. And today I'm super excited to be interviewing Catherine. Catherine, please tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hi, everyone. And thank you very much, Jasmine, for having me on. I think that we have definitely converged in our journeys toward kind of trying to impact on people's lives for the better. I've been in the UAE for almost 11 years now. I started out as a teacher and moved into clinical psychology and then into engineering. And more recently, I have opened my own company where we do a lot of work in the inclusion space. So supporting families, supporting schools, and just general practice around improving inclusion from every aspect, from the educational, the familial, and through some government consultancy as well.
Oh, wow. Sounds a lot. And it's so vast as well. Like you said, education, engineering. I mean, that's amazing. So you chose this title, The Big Picture for Inclusion. So what does that mean and what made you choose it?
So I think inclusion is such an important discussion topic, and it's become a little bit not muddied, but maybe confused in the last few years because there are different interpretations of inclusion. And I think the gender and equity discussion has totally overshadowed inclusion, but it's so much more diverse than that. Inclusion is all about like people with disabilities, people with mixed abilities, people with cognitive dysfunction, people of different race, ethnicity. It's not just about gender, and it's gotten very much drawn down this gender pathway in the last few years because that's what's really in the media. But I think sometimes we forget that it's so much more than that. Inclusion is for everyone. It's the very title of the word is including for everyone. So I just wanted to have an open discussion about what can we do or how can we impact, because we've both got significant audiences. How can we reach people to make an impact and have the world be a little bit more inclusive?
Oh, wow. Wow. And actually, yeah, you're right. I think
High
a lot of
aspirations.
and I think you're right. I think the first thing is a lot of people probably don't really understand what inclusion means because yeah, and I guess like you said, it's about including every single person, and we all deserve to be there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And we're in a very lucky space here. In the Middle East, we are really diverse. So being inclusive in terms of race, ethnicity, and culture is almost not an issue because we're
Yes.
exposed to 100 different races, ethnicities, and culture every day. So that's almost been normalized to the point that it doesn't have to be a huge focus. Of course, there are elements that still need to be developed, but as opposed to, say, maybe smaller, more secular countries where you're like in Ireland, where I'm from, where you're predominantly white, Irish, and Catholic, and that's like 90% of the population. I never knew people of color. I never knew people with diverse backgrounds when I grew up. It wasn't until I came to the rest of the world and started traveling and moved to the UAE that I started making friends with Muslims, with Hindus, with Zoroastrians, all these really rich cultures that really blew my mind. But being here now, it's like it's nothing to me to walk into a friend's house and have maybe 10 different colors of skin and 10 different countries and 10 different belief systems, and everybody just gets on and it's fine. But when you come to looking at people with cognitive disabilities or physical disabilities, how often do we walk into a room, a shop, anywhere in the Middle East and be
Yeah.
exposed to
Yeah.
diverse needs? It's very rare. And it's a huge area that we need to develop.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And I do notice that because every time I go home, yeah, you see it's just so much more widely seen, isn't it? And it's just
Yeah,
normal as well.
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's
And
about here.
bigger
Yeah.
organizations in Europe, like Ireland and the UK, I think are probably pathfinders, Germany as well, where you go into, say, your Tesco store and you might have somebody attending the register in a wheelchair, or you may have somebody with an obvious cognitive disability, or maybe somebody with something like Downs, where you can tell immediately, okay, this person has different barriers to society,
Yeah.
but they're being integrated. You just don't see that in the Middle East.
Yes. And can I just ask, this might be a really stupid question, but what's the correct term? Because sometimes I feel like I don't want to offend, and I think, am I saying the correct term now? Like, can we say disabilities? Like, is that okay? Or, sometimes I just don't know what to say anymore.
This is something that really gets me going. As a psychologist, for the last 11 years, terminology has changed so often. About 5 years ago, I just gave up changing and I said, right, okay, it's going to be whatever it is. I don't care what the new, or this is politically correct. If you have a label that describes something that you know and understand, to me, I just think use the label, because there will always be differences in opinion. So generally, the accepted term are people of mixed abilities or people with
Okay.
individual needs. And that's the one that I use, because it can be individual needs. That's what I like best. Special needs is fine. Like,
Yeah.
they kind of shifted the perspective on the term special needs maybe 8 or 9 years ago. But it is a special need. It's a need that is different to what is typical functioning. But like many things, it's just the ideology around the term that gets the perspective gets shifted, I think. But if you use a term with genuine intent and no means to offend, then use the term. That's my opinion.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And let's just say hi to Behruz. Hi, Behruz. How are you doing? Yes, and if anybody would like to ask us a question or make a comment, please do. We love hearing from you, your opinions as well. So, Catherine, let me just go back a little bit. Like, what made you get into this? Like, was there any particular reason why you decided to work in this field? Just wondering.
I think my shift into psychology, I didn't really realize that I was interested in psychology until I was teaching, and it was a mixture of things. So I was teaching really diverse groups of kids, and in Ireland, it's full inclusion, not out of being really advanced, more out of, okay, everyone's just going to be in the same classroom because there's nowhere else for you to go, in rural schools for sure. So I
Yeah.
was dealing with all these diverse kids and I was just so fascinated. And another part of it was that I grew up in a rural bar in Ireland.
Oh,
And
wow.
my dad used to essentially counsel people from morning till night. Like, he would know the intimate details of everyone's lives, their finances, their romances, their private lives. And he would sit and counsel people at the bar all day. And that really on hindsight, it really had a profound effect on me. So I love counseling. I love psychotherapy. I love hearing people's stories. I never tire of asking questions, which bothers a lot of people because I'm quite intrusive.
Makes
But
people think. Yeah.
yeah, it does. So I think that was kind of the shift. And once I started practicing, I just fell in love with it. And then I started getting more and more kind of overview of the need for change. And being in the UAE, particularly as a Westerner who has multiple qualifications, it's quite easy to make a big impact. Like, you can really, if you find the right avenues and talk to the right people, you can find that you can make changes, and like pretty big changes. So that was really empowering.
Oh, wow. That sounds really interesting. And what do you, I know you mentioned like you work with schools and educational institutions. So what do you actually do in these schools? Like, do you give workshops? Like, what do you do? How do you help with this?
So
I know you do lots of
I'm
things.
a general school consultant, and over the last maybe 8 years, I've done loads of different roles. So I do school development. I do project launches for new campuses. Like I'm a real glutton for study. I try to do something new every year.
Do
And I
you?
qualified as a project manager a few years ago. And I've been using that to do campus development, which is really interesting and very different to what I had been doing. So general school improvement, I'm an international inspector as well. So I do school
Wow.
inspections, which people hate. And I don't really like telling people because they're always, I might murder you. But yeah, so it's general school improvement. So yeah, a school would engage our company, and there are three of us, and we would go and kind of appraise the school for all areas, predominantly inclusion,
Okay.
and then support them in making their services better. And then another branch, then we provide learning support assistance for schools.
Mm. Do you work with like individuals as well? Like if we have like parents watching us, or people watching us who maybe have a special
Yeah,
need.
I do. Not as much, not so much anymore because I don't have the time. I've got a handful of clients who I have had for quite some time and who are very close to me, and I'm quite close to them. Um,
Yeah.
but I generally don't take many new clients, very rarely, and usually only if it's somebody who has asked me for a serious case. But I do sometimes. And to be honest, those clients who I take are probably more rewarding than supporting 10 schools, because you really see the impact. As you know, being a coach, you
Yeah.
see the impact when you're one to one.
No.
It's like somebody calls you up and they say, "Oh, I used the tool you showed me last week and
Mm.
things were so much better." And that's more rewarding than pretty much
Especially,
anything.
no, you're right. Especially when it's something that feels so simple, doesn't it? It can get, you think it's just so simple, and you just think, if everybody knew this, or these simple techniques, life
Yeah.
can just be so much easier. So what kind of like problems do you see then when you're like working in schools or advising? Like what kind of would you say around inclusion? Like what's the most challenging?
The biggest barrier for schools is
Yeah.
a lack of knowledge around special needs. So if you look at the teacher demographic in the UAE, particularly in the whole MENA region, the majority of our teachers are either Asian, predominantly Indian or Pakistani, or they are Arab. So you're looking at the bigger producers of teachers are Egypt, Jordan, and to a lesser degree, Lebanon. And if you look at the BEd in the universities in most of those countries, with the exception of Lebanon, as some of them are starting to integrate, most of
Yeah.
them don't do bespoke training on inclusion or special needs. So a BEd from, let's say, Ireland, the UK, South Africa, America, they would have a distinct standalone module on children with special needs. So every teacher qualifying with a BEd would have a basic understanding of things like dyslexia, autism, ADHD. They'd have an understanding of what it looks like, how to identify it, and a kind of a surface level understanding of how to support it. But in a lot of these BEds coming from the region where the vast majority of our teachers here are qualified from, there is no BEd. And I always use there is no special needs module.
Yeah.
So I always use this analogy with schools. Like imagine you're working in a garage in a small village, and every day you're working on like a Toyota Yaris or a Ford Fiat or whatever. And then somebody brings in a Ferrari and they're like, "Fix my Ferrari." That's essentially what we're asking these teachers to do. That you're giving them something that's so complex, and we expect them to just know, identify it, support it, understand it. But these are really complex issues, and most of our teachers aren't getting trained, and it's a huge issue for them. And then the teachers
Yeah.
feel like they can't perform. They feel
Yeah.
huge pressure because they're not meeting the needs of the kids, they're not meeting the needs of the school, and it's nobody's fault per se.
Yeah.
It's just that there's that gap.
And do you provide that training then? Do you provide training like,
Mm.
yeah. Is it like,
we do.
can you be trained because, just to learn the basics? Like, how long does that take? Could it be quite a quick course?
You could pretty much do like a short introductory course, maybe 3 hours on identification. Just what does it look like? And we would go regionally as to, say, if you're in KSA, if you're in the UAE, let's say the UAE, for example, the top three most dominant individual needs would be autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, closely followed by Downs. So we would train based on the region they're in as to what are statistically the most likely needs that you will have in your class. What does it look like? How can you identify it? You could do that in 2 to 3 hours.
Wow.
And then understanding how to support them then would be much more detailed, bespoke training.
Exactly. And how long would that take? Is that quite quick as well?
It depends on how much detail you want to go in.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to train, let's say you had 200 teachers in your school and you want them to understand how to identify dyslexia and how can we support it in a basic way in class, you could do that in 4 or 5 hours, both together.
Wow. And this would make so many lives easier, so much easier.
Oh yeah, for everyone. And dyslexia affects 15% of the average population. 15. That's 15 out of every 100 kids that you're looking at will statistically have dyslexia. Adults as well, us too.
Yeah. And maybe some of the teachers have these needs and they don't.
Oh yeah, I'm 100% sure. Yeah. And they may never have been diagnosed. They may always have just thought, okay, reading is hard or rhyming is hard. Phonetics are hard. But they never realized, oh, actually it's dyslexia. And with 3 or 4 pretty simple tools, you can transform the process that's happening and radically improve a child's access to education. Radically. And like you say, it's usually really simple things that once you know it, it's like, that's so easy.
I know. But when you don't know, it's just impossible. And I guess the earlier, the better, of course. I mean,
always.
It's easier for everybody. Yeah. And I was going to ask you something else. I've just completely forgotten. Sorry. What was I going to say? Oh, sorry, Catherine. I've completely forgotten my train of thought.
Okay. Maybe it's early onset amnesia.
Oh, God.
It would be very early onset.
Don't say that. You never know. You hear all sorts of weird stories, don't you? But no, I was going to say something about the needs. It's gone. It's completely gone.
Maybe the prevalence of needs, something around the prevalence of needs, or
maybe. Let's see what David has to say first. Hi, David. How are you doing? My daughter 6 was excluded after 3 months. I know what I was going to say now. And as parents told to remove her, she has since been diagnosed with Asperger's. After 9 months of homeschooling, she has now moved to another school who are amazingly inclusive. She is now happy and her mum and dad are too. Oh, wow. Thank you so much, David. This probably happens.
That's an example of the terminology question. Asperger's technically is no longer a term. You're on the autism spectrum. Yeah, but it's so silly because we all know what Asperger's is, and you can identify what the needs are, and it's a valid term. It should be still in use, but it depends on what region. I wonder where is David from? I can't see the chat here.
David's from England, but he's here in Dubai.
Oh, he's here in Dubai. It's illegal to be excluded based on individual needs. It's not legal. They cannot do it. Now, schools would try and find a way around it if there's a risk to the child's health and safety, but you cannot legally. They brought that legislation in back in maybe 2014. That's been long standing. And if you approach your regulator, they will absolutely stand with the parent. They won't have it. They are really firm on that. You can't fail a child due to special needs either, which is a real tricky one for schools, because technically, if you have a child diagnosed with special needs, they have to pass. So schools are faced with a real issue because they have kids who are not meeting their age-related expectations, are technically progressing. You're not allowed to keep a kid back below age age-related norms. You have to keep them in the UAE, you have to keep them in class. So, like at home, sometimes you might hold a child back for a year or
Yeah.
two.
Yeah. Hmm.
You're not allowed to do that here.
Oh, wow. Thanks,
Mhm.
David.
But
Thanks for your
equally,
question.
you're not allowed to progress the child either. So you've got really highly able child. Like in Ireland, you could graduate and go to university at 15 if you're really able. You can just progress, go for it if you're able. You can't do that here either. So it's a barrier for both ends.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And you said about Asperger's is not the term. So we just say autism now then.
It's supposed to be autism now. Yeah. Yeah. You're on a spectrum. Yeah. But we
Ah,
all know what Asperger's is. I still use it. I still
do
use it.
you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's what I was going to say. Like parents, yeah, because you mentioned that you do a lot of support and curriculums, creating curriculums in schools and educational institutions. But yeah, that's what I was going to say. What about parents? Because parents probably could do with support as well, and knowing what to do, and knowing what their rights are. There's so many things to know, and knowing what to watch out for. Like, is there anything? I know it's not a quick answer. It depends,
Well,
but what would you say to
it's a
parents?
there are multiple kind of verticals to that for sure.
Yeah.
So there are a number of organizations here that support parents, like the Butterfly. There's a lady,
Yes.
Marilena. Have you come
Yeah.
across her?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have. I did a workshop for her last week.
Oh, just an amazing organization supporting
Yeah.
parents through advocacy, through sharing information, and just giving them like a roadmap.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
in the UAE particularly, and we're more advanced than most of the MENA, but in the
That's okay.
UAE, the moment you get a diagnosis as a parent, it is it's life changing in a lot of ways, because you've got huge financial burden comes with it here. You will face possible difficulties with your school. You will have the minefield of trying to find um, an effective and ethical therapeutic provision. And it's really hard because there are a million centers for therapeutic provision with very, very widely varying degrees of support. Some of them are really, really terrible, and some of them are really, really good. And it's difficult to know. And
Yes.
then you've got the emotional burden of being told that your child has different needs, or your child is not what you had hoped your child would be, perhaps, or that your child's options might be limited. And that can be really debilitating. I've seen so many marriages break down
Really.
following diagnosis. Oh yeah, a lot. I do a lot of family counseling,
Yeah.
and it's such a big load to carry. It's really big. Like, I know some families who are spending 40,000 dirhams a month on support for a child with special needs. And if you think about that, that's huge.
Of course, it's
That
huge.
for any family, it's a huge
Yeah.
burden.
But what kind of support is that covering? 40,000? Like what support? You mean?
So the
Yeah.
child is in therapy, OT,
Okay.
speech and language, and the Ed Psych report alone is like 8,000 dirhams, depending on where you go. The school
Wow.
is insisted on an LSA, shadow teacher,
Oh,
and
right.
they all do. That's partly why we opened the company, myself and Harmeet,
Mm.
because we were seeing so many families struggling. There's no regulation around qualification or standards for shadow teachers. And we had families paying like 8,000 dirhams a month for somebody who would come and just sit with the child and do nothing.
Yeah.
And if anything, they were acting as a barrier to the child's development. But the school insisted you can't send your child unless they've got a shadow teacher, because they've got something, it could be something like a speech delay that, of
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes you'd be baffled, like it's just a lack of understanding and a lack of accountability as well, or
Yes, yes.
responsibility sometimes. So yeah, that was one of the biggest reasons why we opened inclusion, to help families find practitioners who would actually do what they're supposed to do and remove the barriers that the child is having so that they can access education.
Oh, that's brilliant. So if a parent is maybe not sure if their child has a need, if they contacted you, you could point them in the right direction to where
Oh,
they
yeah.
could find out. Okay.
Yeah.
And support as well. Well, that's brilliant, I think. No, I think it's
And
really,
it is really hard sometimes, especially if you've got young parents or you've got parents of a single child, because you don't have that comparison, you don't have those markers. Like generally, if you've got 2 or more kids, you've got markers where you can say, oh, okay, well, Saeed is developing really rapidly, but Syra has maybe her speech was a year behind. Why would that be? You've got those comparative markers. If you've got an only child and you're a young family and you aren't well versed in things to look for, it all too often goes unnoticed. It's really hard to spot. And of course, as parents, you're with your child every day, so you can communicate with them. You speak the language, whether it's an actual spoken language or not. Like a mum will look at her child and know, do they want water? Do they want a snack? Do they want sleep? Do they want whatever? The child doesn't have to say anything most of the time. You know. So the need for language is always diminished as a parent. And that's often the thing. So like speech and language delay is one of the most common areas of need up until about 5 years old. It starts to diminish after that because kids go to school and they start to naturalize and all of that. But it's really common. So an awful lot of early years kids coming to schools now are experiencing either some sort of speech delay or deficit. But the good news is that the vast majority of them can be overcome within 2 years if they're caught under 5.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Majority. Yeah, it's totally manageable. Totally
it's all early prevention, early intervention, isn't it? So what advice would you give to parents or anyone who's living with somebody with a need?
Look to organizations like the Butterfly, where they've got a really good parent support group. There's another lady, Karen Kennedy. She's a mom of a child with autism, and she has parent support groups as well. Because like any practice, having that network of people around you who can say, no, you're not alone, and no, it's not just you. It's not atypical. It's just atypical in the general population, but there are more of us. That's hugely comforting. That would be probably my top tip. Find a support group where you can bounce ideas off.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think, when you just know you're not alone. I mean, there's just, thanks. And David says, we're planning to move to Dubai as a family, and the proposed school in Dubai has already assessed on paper my daughter and said she needs an LSA or can't join the school. She does not require that in the UK. That's exactly what you said, didn't you, Catherine? Thanks, David.
Only on paper. David, just look around to different schools or pop me an email. You'll get my LinkedIn from Jasmine's LinkedIn. Pop me an email. I can help guide you as to more inclusive schools. Or if there is a need, we can connect you with an LSA if you need. But it's often the first point of call, and particularly in the upper to elite premium schools, they're immediately, oh, you've got a special need, we need an LSA. Well, Asperger's generally do not need an LSA unless there's comorbidity. Maybe there's ADHD or hyperactivity, maybe then, but only then, because Asperger's is totally manageable. If you know what you're doing.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Catherine, for everything you've said. I'm sure, you've definitely helped David, and I'm sure you've helped so many other people. And I think it's like what you said, when you don't know, you can feel so alone, can't you? You have to put up with things because you just don't know any better, and you don't know how to get better. So no, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to say before we finish, and how can people find you as well?
Find me on LinkedIn. You'll identify me from my wobbly head videos that I post that are really badly recorded for Instagram Reels. um, I'm on. Jasmine's posted a number of posts, so we're both on each other's pages. And yeah, if you need any support in any of those areas, for sure, reach out. And thank you so much for having me on. It's really nice to just chat.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, your really valuable advice. I mean, I've learned something as well. And I mean, we could talk about this for hours. But no, and I'm sure we'll talk again as well. But thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you so much, David, for sharing your story as well. And for everybody else who's watching, if you have any questions, comments, please just message us on the post or individually, and I will see everybody next week. Thanks again, Catherine.
Ma salama.